Alrighty, so I real quickly wanted to do a short follow-up video for the Isometric Tavern demo that I put out over the weekend. And I'm hoping this is a video that could be useful for everybody, not just individuals working on Arte. So I would encourage as many of you as would like to take a look at this. And if you do, let me know if it was helpful or you liked it. So this is where we left off with our last demo. We had done some quick isometric designs, a little bit of a color study, and then a pretty quick sketch of the tavern itself in a perspective view. And again, for Arte specifically, putting this much time into a perspective view may or may not be worth it, depending on what point in the production cycle you're at. If it's time for the 3D team to build it, then I would say this might be something that you want to try if it's helpful to your 3D artists. So talk to them about it, and yeah, ask Emily. I'm sure she could give you guys good advice. But to get on with this quick demo, I'm not going to be doing a live demo. I did the work kind of on my own time on the side, and I wanted to show you the end result as well as some of the process and the steps that I took to get there. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you guys. We went from this to voila, the finished draft. I didn't decide to fully paint it or anything. I just wanted to keep it at like a nice grayscale stage. Added in some, fixed up the line work, did some line weight, and then did a little bit of quick shading to indicate some form, help it to read better, and hopefully, as you can see, this does help from a distance being able to define the forms. So the point here was not just to create an image that looked cool or was like, oh, this is neat or fun to do. Although I will say I had fun doing it. The intent was to, as always, communicate more design. So what I'm going to do is put these guys side by side. Let's get rid of the reference so that you can see some of the things I was doing to achieve this end result. So let's take a look. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to hop to the line work first. So right off the bat, I'd like you to notice that my design didn't actually change. It's almost an exact replica of the design. It took much more time to get to this point, but that's one of the reasons I like to start working very quickly when I'm in the sketch and design phase, is so that I can get to this point. If I like the design, then I can continue to push it later, but say it was something I'm not fond of, then I can just do another one, and I haven't invested all of these extra hours into a design that I show and then maybe already know in my head I'm not too happy with it. So a few things I want to point out here are, for one, I cleaned up all of my lines and was really intentional about overlap. For example, let me grab, oh, come on, there we go. Let me grab a brush here. Uh-oh. Hold on, I think I'm getting some kind of error. Let me pause the recording real quick. Okay, think I fixed it for now. We'll see. So areas that before were really messy and unclear, I was just indicating some things in. These lines don't connect up. I went in and actually, and this is stuff I was thinking about beforehand, but I just took the time to render. So where there were specific forms, I'm keeping them in perspective. There's some overlap. There's these other little struts that come out beneath it, which sit on top of this piece. And this board runs behind that. There's overlap here. And notice the difference you get when you do little things like these small overlaps as opposed to over here. This all just feels very flat, and looking just in here, it's hard to read the forms without looking to other places to get the rest of the necessary information. I also got rid of all these kind of lines just so that they weren't confusing. Also, I went back in, and if you look at the top of this roof, I was starting to indicate some stylized lines, and I was doing that a little bit here with some non-linear, non-straight lines. And I pushed that a little bit further, adding some little cuts and breaks. I did it in some of the more interesting key areas, like up here, more than I might have spent time on just a normal plank of wood. Places where the eye will be drawn, I dedicated a little more focus. Also looking at, again, creating this interesting silhouette as opposed to a lot of, like, look at this. This is very uninteresting. I was hinting at some things I wanted to do here, but I went back in and tightened that up. And it's not perfect. It's still, there's some places that are messy. You can see there's some overlapping lines, but in the main areas where your eye focuses, like the front faces of these buildings, I tried to spend a little bit more time. When you're doing architecture, one of the places the eye is typically drawn is towards the face of the building, and it's just this front face on this somewhat complex structure, but people still kind of treat it like a human face in that they look at the front and some of these key areas of interest. So keep that in mind when you're designing, and especially when you're doing concept art. That's sometimes where you want to devote a little more attention. I've talked about in the past grounding your designs when I was getting into some of this quick sketching with some rocks, a little bit of indicated dirt and grass. And I just pushed that a little bit further with all this stuff because I didn't want just like a perfectly straight edge on the bottom of this building. And I even took some time to give form to those rocks, and you can see the difference. This is just kind of a jumbled mess. Here you're like, oh, there's the top surface, the side, this one kind of juts into this rock, and so on. You get a little bit of an edge of grass where there's like a small lip. Maybe there's something kind of similar going on here. So just trying to keep those little bits of interest in mind as well. So let's move on from the line drawing. If you guys have more questions about line drawing in particular, feel free to ask. We can talk about it. The next step was line weight. And you can see all I really did was focus on some of the silhouette areas, literally like outlining this thing. Also areas of overlap where two buildings, one not necessarily always just buildings, but where certain planes sit in front of one another. These faces as well. Highlighted. By highlighted I mean added line weight to some of these key building features like windows. The door has a little bit more line weight to it, and hopefully that's apparent. The intent of line weight is not to be distracting, but just to make it a clearer read. So again, if a good way to check if your line weight was effective is to zoom out. And yeah, it does help some. Stronger outline. You can see the individual pieces of the building, edges of the roof, things like that, windows standing out just a bit more. So that was my second step. Then I came in and created a mask, which is something I've done a lot in the past, and I just used my lasso tool and then the paint bucket to get this all one solid color. And the reason I call it a mask is because I actually will turn this layer off, and then if I hold control and click on this small window, the layer window, you can select everything inside of that. And so I use this to generate the baseline of my value, so I don't have to worry about coloring inside the lines basically. And what I did here is, now with this mask selected, you can press Ctrl H to hide the selection. I'm just going to get rid of it for now. And I went in, I duplicated the mask. I like to keep my mask as a separate layer that's hidden, just so that I don't have to worry about ever messing it up. So I just duplicated it. And then slightly, I went in and lassoed this guy out. And the same with this front piece. And then the wall and this little guy, just to add some value variation to make the individual pieces stand out a little bit more. And this is all very quick. It doesn't take much time. And the next step, I went in and created some cast shadows, and I actually worked at 100% opacity on this layer, created multiply layer, and I painted in with kind of a mid-tone value right about here. And just so that I could see it clearly, and I just selected a very simple, easy to render lighting scenario in which the light's coming from the top and maybe angled in slightly, ever so slightly, from the left side. Let me actually indicate that. And what I mean by that is kind of coming down, not quite directly down, but there's a little bit of an angle to it, and you see that when I add shadows on the back sides of some of these elements, just so that there's not purely top-down lighting. That is very rare and tends to be a little bit flat. But if I selected a lighting scenario in which the light was coming from maybe back in space and coming towards us and then to the right and a little bit up, that would be really tricky because we're dealing with shadows that would be cast slightly upward depending on the angle relative to the origin of light. And you'd have this entire side in shadow, and then you'd have bounce light coming in. I didn't want to worry about that, and yeah, it would be very hard to do. Plus, if you lit it from the back like that, it would be, you wouldn't see as clearly these faces that we're trying to look at. And you could do something like that if you were trying to make a really like cinematic look, going for a very particular lighting scheme. in which case that would be very important to do to inform the entire art team of the lighting for this particular set. But this was uh, a design done more with the intent to be able to be read clearly, so that, say, someone wanted to build this or just to critique the design in general. Alright, let's keep going. So I actually had this down at, I think, 57%, just to soften it up some. And then I came in with a little bit of, I faked the lighting a little bit on this, the right side of these faces, and added a little bit of ambient occlusion in areas like this, where I just wanted to push some of the darker values just a hair. Oh, that's right here, yeah. And then I came in with a really light color dodge layer and added a little bit of extra light on the upward facing parts of my design. And you can see it's really subtle. It was something I was kind of trying out, but to really sell the lighting, it would have taken quite a bit of time investment, and it was already reading pretty well, so I was fairly happy with it, and I didn't want to invest the extra time. The next step, I went in and lit up the windows just to give that kind of like homey, lived-in, warm tavern feel. You know, there's that like warm glow from inside, a little bit coming around the door, and just so that you could see these features stand out some. And finally, a quick layer. I think I chose hard light, and I just kind of cycled through these until I found one I liked and played around with the opacity, and got some roofs in there. Just, I mentioned before in my previous video that I wanted, let's see, I wanted perhaps the roofs of this building to be a nice rich color. Maybe it was different than the rest of the buildings in town, because this is somewhere we want the player to feel like they want to go and visit. Probably should have done the door too, looking at it. Since this is a place maybe the player could interact to enter, so making it a different color to stand out was an idea I had. But the point is, I didn't want that design intent to be lost in this rendering. And then the last steps I did were adding just a little bit of ground indication, just real quick, and then highlight like I did over here. I did it, one, I kind of like the look, makes it stand out for presentation, and I had used that technique on the isometric building, so in terms of consistency, I felt like that was a good move. And yeah, all these little techniques, and it's just some things that I was honestly just kind of playing around with the idea, and maybe things I've used in the past or picked up from other artists. So feel free to use them or to do your own style. There's no right or wrong way to do this. And yeah, so that's about it. Again, just to show one last time the before and after. So I hope you guys enjoyed this short little video. I hope it's helpful to you all in your design work, and I hope to see what you guys can come up with. And I will see y'all later.